Hello and welcome to Story X Story, the podcast by My Matter that dives deep into stories across pop culture, plus gives you advice on creating your own. It's episode 186, and I am your co host, Nigel.
I am Tazziii, content creator and co-host.
And as always, we're here bringing you interesting discussions with diverse voices and to help us out as we look back on the changes of game ownership and current preservation efforts is the founder of Asobi.tech, indie dev. I was going to say fellow indie dev as if I'm a I'm an indie dev.
Is there something you're not telling us, Nigel?
Yeah, maybe I'm projecting in future.
I like that. Manifest.
Yeah, there we go. Quang, welcome to the show.
Hello. Thanks for having us back on.
Yeah, maybe you have to teach me how to indie dev at some point. Who knows? So,
For sure.
yeah, cool. So, Quang was last on the show. I actually can't remember when you were last on the show, but you were last in a conversation when we were at EGX last year for our Do I Look Like a Gamer representation campaign. So, we're on stage talking about navigating careers in video games. And I'm pretty sure you've been on the podcast. I just can't remember. We'll look it up and add a link in the show notes.
Yeah, that was great fun.
Yeah.
Role playing, having a career in video games.
Yeah, no, it's good fun, and yeah, thanks for taking part, and also all the feedback as well. So we've got that saved, and for the next version, we'll just keep improving as we go. So yeah, so listeners, you can subscribe to Story X Story wherever you get your podcasts from, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify. You can also send us your feedback and questions in a variety of ways. You can send us a voice message on our Spotify for Podcasters page. You can always email us at studio77@myamatter.com. Or you can throw your thoughts at us on social media. We are at myamatter on Twitter, at myamatter TV on Instagram and TikTok, or at Life of a W Gamer on Instagram and TikTok, and Tazziii everywhere else. You can also join our Studio 77 Discord to be part of the My Matter community and consider becoming a member to support the work that we do at My Matter. Before we get into today's discussion, let's update you with the latest from the My Matter universe. Although this is technically not the My Matter universe, is someone in the My Matter universe doing some stuff. So anyway, we're going to come back to Tazzii's news about voice acting because Tazziii, you've got some updates on the project that we mentioned in a previous episode, right? And it's good news.
Gosh, yeah, I realised we haven't actually recorded since, have we?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think last time I mentioned that we were kickstarting for the audio drama that I am part of, which is The Disappearance of Lydia Fontaine. And it was successfully kickstarted. We hit a couple of stretch goals as well. So we're going to, originally I think it was 6 episodes we were going to be recording, and we're going to be doing more than that. And yeah, so look out for updates on that. I'm really excited because every now and again I think about like, oh, I really want to know the rest of that story. And I'm like, what's that story from again? And I'm like I think it's like a TV show that I've watched. And I'm like, oh no, wait, it's the audio drama that I voice acted in because it's that good. I'm like on the edge of my seat for it. I'm like, I need to know the next bit. And it randomly pops into my head. But yeah, so like we're still trying to figure out like how to describe it. But it's like a science fiction, fantasy, cyberpunk, magical, surrealist narrative. I feel like it pulls themes from, I don't know, if you like basically anything fantasy, cyberpunk, literally, because I was about to go, if you like Game of Thrones, you probably like this, but then I'm like, oh, if you like anything magical, like Lord of the Rings, you'll probably like this. I don't know, like it's it's good, basically.
Yeah, I'm intrigued.
But yeah, you'll like as we develop, you'll find out more. We'll start recording later on in the year, and going into next year.
Sounds good. All right, we're gonna have to start talking more about voice acting on the show and understanding how that works. So we might have something for that later in the year. But sounds cool. Congratulations on another Kickstarter project that's been backed.
Thank you. Yeah, second of the year.
Second of the year, and the first one is the one that we did, My Matter, at the start of the year. So this was for Origins Against All Odds, which is the story that features Tazzii's character in the My Matter universe. And it's a reflective, hope filled manga about pursuing your creative career goals in the face of resistance from doubters and the world around you. So we are a bit behind schedule on the original plan, which I guess is not necessarily out of the ordinary for Kickstarters, but it is being worked on. So this month we are finishing the script and starting the artwork. And yeah, it's moving and it's feeling good about like the writing process, having sort of young people input on it as well. So it's like ticking a lot of my meta boxes as well as being a manga in our universe. So yeah, so Kickstarter backers will get notifications or would have already got notifications on the updated schedule. And then it does mean we'll soon have actual visuals to show, because that's always the difficult thing about like writing is that you can't show like chicken scratch on a page. It's it's a difficult thing to show, not very glamorous, but is important for getting the artwork and everything done. So look out for that. In the meantime, you can also get the titles from our universe that we've already done. So Samurai Chef being our first one, up until the latest one, Serious Through the Fog. They're all ages stories set within our shared universe. We also have projects to come for the Do I Look Like a Gamer campaign. So this is the campaign that works to promote inclusion and diversity in the video games industry, as well as showcasing pathways into games for young and aspiring talent. So it's now a yearly initiative. And that means each year we start with a snapshot of 40 players and makers to showcase representation where it does exist as a way to inspire future generations of diverse talent. And then we go into a schedule of events and activities. So far this year, we've had our Games Industry Explained event at King's headquarters in London. We've had our Cupcake and Gamepad social most recently at Samsung KX, which is really cool. In between, we've had events at other places. So we've been at Barclays Game Frenzy. We've been at Comic-Con, which was a blur of a weekend of different activities, and we'll be back there in October. We do have another event to come, which is our Friends and Family Game Design Jam. So this is a single-day event to introduce young and aspiring game developers to the concept of game design. So it's about coming with a group, family, friends, or even coming as an individual, and then we'll put you in a group. So you either come with friends or you meet new friends. So we want to encourage people to come, older family members to come and understand the process so they can support each other. So we've got by the time you listen to this, we might have a date set. We've had to move a few things around, but definitely head to looklikeagamer.com. And then once that date has been confirmed, along with the venue, details will be there. And then later in the year, we'll be at the Festival of the Girls. So this will be in October 5th and 6th. So we'll be bringing our manga and also the Do I Look Like a Gamer campaign to the Islington Business Design Centre to help the mission and the ethos of this event of inspiring young girls aged 7 to 11 into different types of career paths that they could go into. So yeah, moving the campaign around to different places. So yeah, stay tuned for those announcements, and thank you to Rocksteady Studios for their sponsorship of the campaign for another year. So their support has been genuinely instrumental for bringing the vision to life, because it actually helps us do it and make it somewhat sustainable, as well as being able to highlight the diverse roles and the people that exist in gaming today. We can support our team members, like joining in with the events and things. So we appreciate their commitment, and it helps us inspire young people from underrepresented groups and help drive progress in the games industry. So thank you to them, and thank you to everyone who's taken part so far and those still to come. We're doing our monthly Studio 77 activities. So this is our digital platform where we talk to people across different professions in the creative industries, from comics, video games, animation, cosplay, and we play games sometimes. So we do our Studio 77 report where Tazziii and I recap the latest My Matter announcements and event news and just have random conversations, basically. So it's very much a fly in the wall kind of deal. So you can watch us record the video live on Twitch, and then you can also see the edited version that goes up on YouTube. We also have our casual conversations with comic creators, which typically is the first Tuesday of each month. So for August, I spoke with Ian Richardson, who's a British comic artist who's worked on some big titles like Judge Dredd, and for those who follow the British comic scene as well. And for September, I'll be talking to Tazio Bettin. So that will be on the 4th of. Actually, that would be actually be a Wednesday because we had to shift things around. So the schedule does shift, but yeah, just follow us on Twitch and on socials, and you'll get the notification. It's all about talking to a different comic creator about the craft of making comics and just trying to get to know the human behind the art form. And then we also play games, like I said. So we play games each month for your amusement, for someone's amusement. Each month we play a different game, or sometimes we come back to a game that we've enjoyed. So we recently did Lego Fortnite, which we really enjoyed. I think some people are hooked on that now. And
No names.
not saying any names, but
I need us to play again because there's a whole thing that we need to do together, and I can't do anything else in the game until we've done it together. So,
okay.
yeah,
Is it waging war against the random villagers that enter our space?
no.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, I'll still help out. So you can catch that. You can also catch the VOD of the games nights after we do them for 14 days anyway. And then we've got an ongoing mission of putting the highlights up on our YouTube channel. And if you're a young aspiring creative professional or you know one, then check out the My Matter Showrunners Work Experience program. So we've been creating opportunities for young people aged 16 and up to work with our team across comic production, events, and content creation. And I should add actually animation. So we're exploring that as well. So we've got a group of artistically minded, so illustration specifically individuals. So they're working on different aspects of story and then looking into animation as well. So yeah, if that sounds cool, email us and we will tell you more. So showrunners@mymatter.com and you'll get the information there. So yeah, so now you're caught up with the My Matter universe. Let's talk about today's main topic. We're going to be talking about video game ownership and preservation. So this is something that I feel is bubbling up. I mean, it's always been there, but more and more for probably mostly negative reasons. But it's becoming more and more, or it's in the awareness more and more people who play games. So we're going to discuss it and see what we make of it by the end. But before we get into it, I did introduce Quang. Quang, do you want to tell us a bit more about what you do and like maybe your perspective on the current state of video game preservation?
Yeah, sure thing. So as I said, my name's Quang. I run a small micro window indie studio called Asobi.tech. We specifically make new games for old systems, and currently we make stuff for the Game Boy and Game Boy Color. The other systems we were looking at is things like the Atari ST, the Sega Mega Drive, the Vectrex even. But I'm a huge fan and proponent of retro hardware and using them to play games. I grew up in the 80s and 90s playing video games on those old machines, and they're a huge part of my life. And preservation of those machines and their games is a big part of what I'm interested in. So, we talk about game ownership. Back in the early days, we'd buy cartridges, CDs, tapes, and things like that to play our games on, and we would own the game because we would physically own them. And then the digital storefront started showing up. We had Xbox Live and Steam and the others started showing up, and then we would have them as downloads, but we never physically owned them anymore. So the ownership kind of changed in a way.
Mm.
Um, it's always weird because as someone who's grown up with such tangible objects, the same with music cassette tapes and VHS tapes and music CDs. Having the physical object in my hand was a big part of collecting, but things have all changed around that with digital distribution.
Yeah, no, for sure. And better for worse, better and for worse, I could say. Tazzy, how do you come at this? Like, what's your views on the current state of game ownership and preservation?
So I didn't grow up in the 80s. I grew up in the 90s. 90s and early 2000s. So I grew up with physical games still. And then yeah, I really didn't jump onto the whole like digital downloading for a while after it sort of like I was still very much like I need the physical game. And then nowadays, I have to be honest, I have Game Pass. I really enjoy Game Pass, but I also don't like the idea of not owning any games. So if there is a game, actually there is one game I really need to buy, but if there's a game that I really, really love, I'd prefer to own it, like a physical copy as well, which becomes harder and harder. Like I have a Series S as well as an Xbox Series X, and so my S doesn't take disc, which is, I mean, it makes it, it's got its pros and cons, right? But one of the cons is that then if I have physical games, they are not playable. Also, like, even if I'm really not a fan of buying digital games, unless they're on Steam, that's a whole different story because they're so cheap when I do. But Steam's the but I'm not a fan of buying digital games on console.
Interesting.
I'm gonna agree with preferring to own the physical media, but there is something to be said about the convenience of digital games. I live in London, and London's space is a premium, so I don't really have space to have all these games. Also, it's like I think from my Steam library and my Nintendo Switch are the two machines that nearly all my content for them is digital. It's just pure convenience being able to pick it up and play whatever, rather than go searching for the cartridge or I guess if it's on PC, then it'll be CD. I guess. Yeah, there's something to be definitely said for the convenience of it.
Convenience will get you.
Yeah. And then there's certain games that just work better not owning them, like not having them physical. And I'll bring this up in a bit as well. But my peak example, and it's not just because I've literally just stopped playing it just before we started recording it.
Recency
but Call of
bias.
Duty, I stopped playing Call of Duty for ages, and then I'm literally just started playing again. But I used to be a massive Call of Duty fan and buy Call of Duty on two consoles because I was a PS3 and an Xbox 360 player, physical, and then every year I have like a stack of duplicates. Like that's a lot of games to like repeatedly be buying when realistically you don't really go back to the previous ones that much. Like, so again, I feel like it depends on the game. There is levels of convenience. Like there's some games that like I'm not going to play that much anyway. There's no point in me having like a stack of games that are kind of like one and done ones. But if it's like something that like truly like every Zelda game, I want that physical kind of thing because they're like a special place in my heart. Or like the other day, even I mean this is even though it was a game I had bought digitally, I couldn't play it without being connected to the internet for it to like say, oh yeah, you own this game.
You own this, yeah.
Because it had been so long since I started it, and that was during there was like an Xbox outage, so it couldn't ping to. So yeah, like again, pros and cons.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm similar in terms of I'm old enough to have dealt with NES and actual cartridges. But for those who may not be of that time, I'll just give a bit of a background into how we got here, like the evolution of game ownership, because it might surprise some listeners, and I know definitely a lot of kids in our workshops to think about a time where games were on cartridges and discs. So this idea of game ownership has really changed quite drastically when you think about it over the past few decades. So going from those cartridges and discs to digital downloads, streaming services, and it really has raised the question about what does it mean to own a game today. So hardware plays a large role, and something I was thinking a lot about in terms of like if that's unique to video games. As technology advances, older hardware becomes obsolete, and then that creates a challenge for playing and preserving the games designed for those systems, on top of outdated copyright laws that can prevent preservation efforts. So the idea of preserving games isn't necessarily just a cultural thing or an art thing. There's also a business opportunity. So we'll look at some of that as well. And we'll go over the ways that the industry like balances that nostalgia, that preservation, and profit in their approach to older games. So as I was putting the notes together, there were some interesting stats, and I'll add this to the show notes. So there is some reporting or research around this, and I got a piece from gamesindustry.biz. So this is by Kumar Safifi Sabet, who's talking about the Commodore 64, which was before my time, but a console that proved so era defining. And what I just like stood out to me is that this is something that launched in 1982, 8-bit computer. Again, some people mind blown, 8 bits. And it had a lot of popular titles that you might have even heard of today, like Castle Wolfenstein, Ghostbusters, Buggy Boy, which is new to me. And according to a book that was referenced in this article, Bitmap Books, studios created approximately 10,000 titles for the system during its 12-year lifespan. And despite being one of the most influential and historically important platforms of its era, research by the Video Game History Foundation noted just 4.5% of Commodore 64 games are in commercial circulation today, with the vast majority of the library completely accessible. And the Commodore 64 is not an exception. Only 13% of titles released between 1960 and 2009 are in like commercially available. And Tazzy mentioned Steam as being sort of a big part of that. And I do remember when Steam first came and how the perception of it has changed from then compared to now. So Steam was launched in 2003, and it was primarily for Half-Life 2, as that time Valve were all about the Half-Life series. And it was mandatory for Half-Life 2 players. And it marked a shift from physical disc to that concept of digital ownership that is tied to online accounts. So in 2005, Steam then becomes a store and offered third-party games for digital purchase. Fast forward to 2011, you've got Steam Workshop, a marketplace introducing in-game items, trading, monetization, and again, accelerating that idea of digital ownership. And then in 2017, Steam Direct opens the platform to all developers, increasing digital game accessibility. So I don't know if either of you were like conscious of Steam when it first came out, but it really sticks in my mind as one of the first, like I would say push, because I remember there was a backlash against it, but Valve just stuck with it, and I guess it's paid off because that's what they do now. But yeah, I feel it's the one that really signaled that okay, we are moving into this digital era. Yeah, were either of you familiar with it in those early days?
I think my first experiences of Steam were when the games were like when the magazines were going. Oh yeah, if you want to get your game, you can go to your local store, or you can pick it up on Steam. And I guess Steam, in my head, obviously, as you said, it was linked to Valve and Half Life, and that's what I knew it for. And I didn't realize at some point they started releasing other people's games. So there's this weird transition, which at first didn't make sense, and then all of a sudden everyone was doing it.
Yeah.
Everyone was putting the games on Steam, and it felt like it went from almost nothing to everyone. And that was my first memory of Steam, I guess.
Yeah, Tazzy, what were you going to say?
I was going to say in 2003, I had no idea about Steam. I played Nintendo games. What PlayStation console was out then? Whatever PlayStation console was out then. And the only PC gaming I done was online with Neopets and a few like learning games by like the book publisher DK. So
I remember
yeah.
Mavis Beacon typing learning game. That's a flashback. Anyway.
So yeah, I had and Sims. Obviously, I was playing Sims, but that was
Sims,
not at
right.
my house. That was at my friend's house because I didn't own Sims.
Okay.
So we'd go
Yeah.
over and group
Okay.
play Sims. But yes, so no, I had zero idea about Steam back then. I don't think I really knew about Steam until like I don't know, like 2007, 2008, and I didn't experience Steam until 2016.
Okay. Yeah, they'd worked out all the kinks by
Yeah,
by
when
then.
I built my first PC.
Yeah, I mean, we'll get into like the platforms and services. I just wanted to circle back quickly to that, the statistics around the number of old games that are available. And in on one hand, it was it feels shocking because it feels such a low number. But then on the flip side, wondering, and I'm playing devil's advocate a bit here, but what is the problem with not being able to play old games? Because they're old games, right? Once you're done, and you move on to the next one. That feels like the trend in games. You finish the old one, you dump that, and you move on to the next
That's so upsetting. That's so upsetting.
one.
Both of us just sitting here with
Yeah.
rage.
There's things like if you look at other media, you look at movies, TV, and music. People still listen to the symphonies of the greats, Beethoven, Mozart, Chopin. And then we watch movies. We watched. I don't know. I think the other day I watched Wizard of Oz, and that was what made in the 30s, I think, something like that. And just because something's old doesn't mean it has lost its value. So many games that are my comfort games that I'll go back to over and over again. And there were so many games that were released back in the day that it's impossible for me to have played them all. To rediscover something old that was around and I completely missed, that's a joy. So say just because a game is how many years old, that means it's lost its value. That's ridiculous.
Just dropping so many golden nuggets there. You are.
Yeah.
I'm just here like snapping and I could not agree more with every single statement you said there. Like the idea that like a game, it's like you just disregard a game. Like no, some people are missing. If you think like that, you're missing out on games that you like didn't get to play because you weren't even born yet as well.
Yeah, there's that too.
Like, and if you go back to older games, you can actually like, and especially if you're like in development, I feel like a lot of young people would gain so much from playing older games if they want to go into video game development, because it strips a lot of the things back down to the basics as well, of like what made these games so great when there wasn't like these amazing graphics and didn't have these amazing power. Like what created these fun lasting experiences. And like I go back and play older games, actually, as I've mentioned on the podcast earlier in the year, of like not maybe feeling so great, and a lot of that was coming out and like not being able to enjoy games that much. And one of the things that I did was go back and play some older games. I went back and played, funnily enough, a remake, but Majora's Mask. I played it on my 3DS because actually I feel like that's the best version of Majora's Mask as someone who cannot complete it. This is a lot more gracious. But then I also repaired mine and a friend's like OG Pokemon Gold and Pokemon Crystal games because the battery goes on them. So I put new batteries in them so that we could play those. And like the joy that I felt going back to like a more simplified version of Pokemon was just like amazing. And then even like a timeless classic, Mario Kart.
Yeah.
Timeless. My personal favorite is Double Dash. And there has not been a Mario Kart that plays like that ever again. And that was like just so much of my childhood, so much fun, and playing that again like now just brings me so much joy. But there's just so much you can, like, games don't stop a lot of good games don't stop being good. Oh my god, I forgot like an absolute classic of mine.
Classic.
Time Crisis.
Oh yeah.
And I don't know about both of you, but my personal Time Crisis favorite is Time Crisis 2. And like does not ever stop being fun. I've played that game so many times. Yeah, every time I play it, it's newly fun, and then I play it with someone new, and it's fun playing it with someone else. And yeah, there's just so many examples of that. I could literally go on and on and on. And then there's games that I don't play, and then I go back to play because someone else recommends it, or I'm at their house, or they lend it to me, and I'm like, oh, how did I miss this game when it was out? Like, this is amazing.
I feel that. But then I also feel, and I'm actually personally bad at preservation because I don't think I've got hardly any of my old consoles. I know I'm just like move on to the next thing. But I hear you on the value side. You know what's weird though? This is going to be a weird analogy, but I almost see the perception of games as like hip hop, and I'll explain what I mean by this. I feel there's been a like prevailing thought in hip hop where once you get to like as an artist, once you get to like 30, 35, like you're old and you no longer have any value. So sometimes it's weird for people, especially younger people, to see artists that were big in like 80s, 90s, even early 2000s, and are now 40s, even 50s, and that, because they're talking about different things. And when you're 40, 50, you talk about different things than when you're in your teens, in your 20s. And I've always seen this kind of like conflict between that old and new, old artists and new audience. And I feel similar in games, where even though I agree with what you're saying, and I feel in games the wide assumption is once a console is done, you're on to the next one, because you don't necessarily, like, the general audience, and I'm generalizing here, but it's always about the new thing. It's always about the latest and greatest, and we don't want the old thing. We want, when's the new console coming out? When's the upgrade to the new console coming out? But there isn't so much. I don't know, like, I'll use the word respect for the old, and it might just be me projecting a little bit from my younger days, but that's what I feel with games. And I don't know if it's tied to because games, maybe more so than other mediums, are so tied to the systems. And once you stop selling the systems, it's like that's that. Like, imagine if PlayStation released a game on PS2 like today. That would
Yeah.
be weird. I'm also aware that Quang is releasing games on Game Boy, but even that because Quang, do you get looks, like weird looks, including myself? Because I feel I might have given you a weird look when you told me what you were doing. Like, when you say what you're doing, is that like, do you get like, weird looks for that because it's such an old system?
To be fair, like, generally it's a positive thing. People are like, that's so cool, because people have so much nostalgia for the Game Boy. Even people who didn't grow up when the Game Boy was around, people know what a Game Boy is.
Mm,
There's this whole new wave of 20-year-olds who are playing Game Boy because they enjoy the modding scene. In the same way,
nice.
people are getting into vinyl and cassette tapes and things like that. People enjoy this nostalgia and this retro feel for everything, and there is an audience for it. So I don't, again, it's ridiculous to think that a game or even any kind of media loses its value once it's no longer relevant. It's ridiculous.
I have 2 points to make for that, because I was thinking like vinyl and cassettes making a comeback. I can understand vinyl, but cassettes making a comeback is really interesting. I've noticed that. But there's also, like, if you compare it to music in that case, like, vinyls sound different to digital music. And I think that's the same with a lot of like retro games. Like a Game Boy feels different, and there's sort of like a beautiful element of it that, even like Quang said, like 20-year-olds getting into it, even if they didn't experience it originally, there's like a something about it that you can't
Mm.
quite pin, like the imperfection kind of, you can't quite pin it down to anything, but there's like a kind of magic to it. And then the second thing is this sickness in our society of not being satisfied and not being able to take a moment and experience gratitude of what you have, and
Yeah.
always chasing for something better, something shinier, something newer, and which is like propelled by this consumer capitalist led society. I'm going really deep, but
Yeah. We're always going to get to capitalism. It was always going to happen.
yeah, but it's most relevant in gaming. I think out of all the mediums, it is the worst for it, because how quickly do you see a game get old? And especially I find, like, for the younger generation, they just in general, like, how they experience social media and gaming is like the new thing, like constantly this like consumerist throwaway thing, but also like the levels of dissatisfaction in people's lives that lead to even worse, like mental health issues. And that is relevant in gaming. Like, the amount of times that I've seen people complain that there's not enough games, and I'm like, have
Which
you
is a
seen how
mad.
many games are getting
That's,
released? What do you mean not enough games? There's
that's
not enough
such a mad
time.
statement. Yeah.
Like,
There are enough games.
have you taken a moment to actually look and experience and even look at like more games? There is, if you just look at Steam, at how many games get released a day. I don't know the number, but I know it's
It's like hundreds.
ridiculous.
Yeah.
So like constantly chasing the carrot. There's never a game that's good enough, basically. And I think it's more of a reflection on society as a whole. than, and
Perhaps we're
then
going deep
games just
now.
perpetuates it even more. Like I can't not bring it up because I think it is relevant to how we experience games. And and then like one of the other points is if games just get old, GTA 5 would not still be successful.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that is an old game, isn't it?
That game is essentially ancient at this point. It has spanned across three am I counting right? 3 generations of console?
Xbox 360, PS3, yeah, PS4, yeah.
Yeah, three generations. I mean, I'm not gonna be surprised if it hits that fourth. Like it's on its way to hitting that fourth.
Yeah, well, it's a new game according to accountants. It's new every month.
So yeah, like just it. I don't know. I've talked myself into
No,
a circle there.
yes, no, I hear that. I guess it's like changing people's perception, because if you're always looking for the new, you're always looking for the new thing. Especially like games are such a visual medium or visual thing to experience. Then it is, oftentimes it's like graphics. It's like it has to be the best graphics, and sign of like old is like old graphics. This looks old. I've seen that around as well. But and then like to Quang's point about what you can learn going back, and no, that was Tazzie's point. To Tazzie's point about what you can learn going back as well. But then it becomes like an access thing, and this is why I keep bringing up the idea of the consoles themselves, the hardware themselves, maybe hurting this or being an impediment to this. When I was going through the Video Game History Foundation, because they did a whole report in this, they had a really good line that I've got in my notes, and they said, imagine if the only way to watch Titanic was to find a used VHS tape and maintain your own vintage equipment so that you could still watch it. And what if no library, not even the Library of Congress, could do any better? They could keep and digitize that VHS of Titanic, but you'd have to go all the way there to watch it. It sounds crazy, but that's the reality we live in with video games. $180 billion industry, while the games and their history disappear. And it's yeah, that sounds crazy, because if you think about other mediums, so Titanic an example, so many classic films and TV shows are accessible through different streaming services or even on physical media, rentals, books. I mean, books are omnipresent, like widely available. All the classics that are public domain or in reprint, and even music, you can access older albums. But when I think about, yeah, where unless outside of like the commercial areas, where do you go to get the old games? And then it comes back to that balance between the commercial and then the art, the preservation for preservation's sake, like the culture. And it made me think of like remakes and remasters, where initially I looked at them as, I looked at them, or some of them, as like capitalist cash grabs. I'm gonna say and sometimes it comes across that way. But more recently, I've been thinking of, actually, are they a means of preservation? And I don't know what you both think about, because I feel like we're seeing more remakes and remasters now, and I don't know if that's lazy game development, or is that bringing back old, quote unquote, old games to a new audience, sprucing them up a little bit and keeping that game alive.
I'm all for it.
Okay.
Yeah, keep the games alive. There are various games that are releasing collections, so like Atari, Capcom, Sega, they release collections where you can play all their old games. No, give people the ability to play their old games. As you said, not everyone has the old consoles to play and the systems to set up and to play these old games. So if they can experience them in any way, I'm happy for them to have that. Tazzy, you mentioned that she's playing Majora's Mask on a 3DS,
Yeah.
and obviously that's not how it came originally, but it's a bit more accessible, and I'm all for that. If I can read books on a Kindle, or I can watch something on my tablet, or just being accessible to all media. You talk about the media being lost in video games, but this plenty of lost media in TV, in films, and music. We live in a period of time now where there's so much media, it's impossible to consume everything. So having to pick and choose is very important. I think things were different when we were younger because we had four, maybe five channels on TV. We didn't have TV on demand. We could maybe afford one game every 6 months or something like that. We paid 60, 70 pounds for a cartridge sometimes. So our access to media was far more limited. But now we have so much. It's got to a point where it's impossible to even know what to play or what to do. I want to go back to a point you made about the visuals and stuff. Look at Roblox. Look at Minecraft. I don't think the graphic fidelity is the important part there. It's the important part is ultimately the game and how it plays and how it engrosses a person. I do think the modern generation can get past of how a game looks. So yeah, just having the games available for people to play, whether we have remake or collection, I'm all for that for sure.
Okay, because I've seen some. I mean, there's been some hits, but there's also been some misses with some remakes. Tazzy, what are you
Yeah.
gonna?
So I was gonna say yes and no. Yeah, but like Quang said, all for it. It's not always done very well.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the problem.
So like Majora's Mask is a perfect example. My first experience of Majora's Mask was a collection on GameCube, which again is not its original release, but was my first experience of it. And then on the 3DS, and the GameCube version, as far as I'm aware, is pretty much just a port. And then the 3DS version was like an improvement. You could have more saves, and it had like some quality of life kind of improvements on it. And then obviously like made for the 3DS. Completely different type of system. But then there's some remakes that like they've changed so much that you've kind of lost you've made like a worse game than it originally
Yeah.
was. And so it's important that if you are gonna making a decision of whether it's gonna be like it's gonna be a remaster or like a complete remake, and like, are you actually preserving the game? Are you
The
preserving
original game, the
the
original like intent of
experience
the
of
game.
playing?
Even.
Yeah, obviously you're gonna have to change some things to like match updated controls
Yeah.
and stuff like that, but like keeping that original intent. And also like certain games like getting remastered too soon. The Last of Us.
Last of Us. Yeah.
When you can still experience that game, like there's not a barrier
So is that a
to
criteria
experience.
then, where there is a barrier to experiencing the original, then could put it forward as a candidate for remastering or remaking?
Yeah, I feel like give it some
Yeah,
time.
definitely.
Like I feel like it's a waste of money otherwise, like with developing that game. When it could go somewhere else, either on a new game or bringing forward an older game that like deserves it kind of thing. Not
Yeah.
but
But
like
that game
needs
might
to
not have a
be brought
HBO show attached, Tassie.
forward.
So
Yeah, but like, well, then make a HBO show attached to it. Like, I don't care. Do what you got to do to get that game made. Like, or
I don't know if Pedro Pascal's free. I don't know what is.
yeah, because it just like it is sad when you see games get lost, and it's kind of frustrating when you see a remake that doesn't need to be remade yet. You know,
Mm,
like something else could get that love. I do like the like Nintendo have their virtual consoles
yeah.
of all the older consoles, which I think was like pretty cool. I still prefer to like boot up my GameCube. There is something special. I've tried to play a few games that have been remade on the Switch, and I'm like, oh no. I'm gonna play the GameCube version, but like at least people experience it. But yeah, I can't remember.
Okay.
I'm just gushing about
Actually,
games
yeah,
now.
games.
Can you tell that I
Spark
love
something.
games?
Yeah. You're giving hints. Yeah, I mean that criteria thing is, and you already brought up the capitalist aspect to this, and I feel we weren't going to get through this conversation without getting there because there are I'd say it's like so little efforts for preservation, and a lot of it requires input from the games industry. So this is where you get into, as we're talking about remakes and remasters, like what gets remade. So there is a intent, there's a consideration of intent to like remakes and remasters, because you can say, okay, this game it's been ages since it came out. So I think a good example is Resident Evil 2, which was remade in 2019 for a game that originally came out in 1998, or even Final Fantasy 7 remake, which depending on your views on turn-based action versus real time and stuff like that, you might feel a different way. But by and large, it's been well received. So that's a game that originally came out in 1997. Yeah, so things like that where it's like, okay, like Tazzy said, like it might have been lost, or there's a bigger barrier to accessing that game, and you can bring it into the modern day and add quality of life, or in the case of Final Fantasy, just a whole new sort of vision on the game while trying to keep the original feel. But then there are those, you can't escape like the commercial consideration, like The Last of Us, there's a show, so we've got to update this game for that new audience that's going to become aware. They might not have a PS3, or but they'd have anyway. Yeah, they'd have a PS4. But yeah, let's give them something new and shiny attached to the new story they've been introduced to. So it kind of makes me think about whose responsibility is this? Is because if you leave it to the games company, so you think it's their responsibility, they might not always come at it with the purest of intentions.
That's the other issue though, because there's so much like music goes into the public domain, or like literature.
Yeah.
I mean, it takes a long time, but eventually it
Yeah.
goes into the public domain. Games don't. The IP might, but the game itself.
There's websites. There's the term abandonware.
Yeah,
No one
they
no longer has no one claims the rights for the game.
but they don't.
It's a bit of a grey area.
Yeah, but they don't, because I think we found this out. We were told this recently, because they're not considered an art.
Oh yeah, the whole Ofcom thing.
So they they like, someone will just be like sitting on the rights to something, so they just go in this like thing, and if they care about it, then they can get it taken down. And at the moment, especially at the moment, in the time of like, let's remake, let's revive old IP and stuff like that, people will sit on IP and stuff will just like collect digital dust in the back of some digital closet somewhere. So I feel like it would be great if there was like, if no one's doing anything with this thing, then it can go into this abandonware, like, but as well, like files get lost. There's just so much kind of things.
So recently we had the Wii and Wii U stores closed. We've had the Xbox 360 store closed, the PS3 store closed. All these stores closed. There are fan and preservationists out there who have backed things up and made them available. They're out there in the dark corners of the web. Obviously, they're not officially licensed or endorsed by the game developers out there, but the files are still out there because people care and people want their games. If you look at the game Scott Pilgrim versus the World, that was lost for a while, but due to licensing, the band that did the music for it, Anna Managuchi, they couldn't play the music at their gigs because they didn't have the license to play it. And then recently, I think maybe a couple of years back, 2021, I think it was thereabout, they managed to pull the rights back and get all the pieces in place to re-release the game and have a physical copy and play the music again. And it was just wonderful to bring that back. But there's so many games are lost through the digital stores because no companies decided to renew the license. Games like Outrun, who have a Ferrari license, are lost because they don't want to pay Ferrari for the license. Daytona, they don't want to pay Daytona pay for the license game unless the company sees a value in it or they can make money from it. They don't want to be selling money out for nothing.
Is this like, we might not know this? This might be like homework for later. But so you mentioned like the Ferrari license. Would that be the same as like a film? So like if you make a film and it's got a Ferrari in it, and I put that film, I don't know, it initially comes out in cinema and then it comes out on DVD and then streaming. Is that like do we know if that's like an additional payment each time? Is it the same as in games, or is games unique in terms
So,
of that
so
aspect?
yeah, so if it's a streaming media, so if it came out on Netflix, for example, they would have the license for a certain amount of time. After that license expires, they can no longer show that movie or that show on Netflix.
And that's why
If it's a
things like will
physical
disappear.
media, exactly. So, but if it's physical media, so if they release it on DVD or VHS, they can't take that away from you because you have the physical media. The license may have expired, but if they release it physically, then that's great. Whereas, Scott Pilgrim first came out and Outrun was on digital stores, they can take that away from you.
Also, product placement works differently in
Yeah.
film
That's
than
what I'm
video
thinking here.
games.
The rules work differently? So because it feels like, as I was putting the notes together, that idea, because I mentioned the technical aspect of the hardware and also like the perception of quote unquote older games. Well, they are older games. I don't know why I put that in quotes, but just
What
that's
is older?
actually, yeah, fair point. Yeah. So I mentioned those bits, but then there is the licensing, the copyright laws around it that sort of prevent things. So I did mention the Video Game History Foundation, who made the point about like games aren't allowed to be basically because of the law aren't allowed to be treated the same way as film and TV, that where you can digitize and share those old works, but you can't with games. And I don't know exactly what decisions were made behind that
Mm.
decision, but that feels frustrating. That feels like the industry, and it's worth noting that relatively speaking, the games industry is younger than the other industries I mentioned, especially like books, literature. So maybe that part of this is like growing
Mm.
pains, figuring things out, figuring out the value. Because Quang, you mentioned abandonware, and came across a studio, Night Dive Studio. So it's an American video game developer, and they're known for obtaining rights to abandonware video games and updating them for modern platforms and then re-releasing them through a digital distribution service. So that's going towards the preservation of older games. And their business director of business development, Larry Cooperman, said in an interview with PC Gamer at GDC that I think the issue of games as art has been answered more than enough. But taking it to the next level, if we all agree that games are art, then the people that make games are artists and deserve to be remembered that way and deserve to have their names incorporated into what we do going forward. And I feel that question of video games as art and not just products, and that was like the conversation me and Tazziii had with this person who mentioned sort of that how they're spoken about and how they're allowed to or not allowed to be promoted on, I think it was radio specifically. It's that question of art, right? Because if we see games as art, then you do it for the sake of doing it because it's art. You preserve art and it's part of the culture. But if we see games as products, and maybe that's what I was trying to get to with the idea of like sort of it's old, it's done. Because if it's a product, what's the value of going back? Because you will always go forward for the most part. But if it's art, then we must preserve art because the games that are made when they were made say something about the time they were made
Yeah.
and the people that made them.
But then it goes back to it just being like, you could say that about books or movies or film. Or in fact, when I say movies, I'm going to change movies to like, what would the encompassing word been? Productions. Because all of those things are the same, right? You sell a movie, you sell artwork, you sell all those things. A lot of them get mass produced and distributed. So what makes games so different? And then I think you said something earlier about it being younger. I think as well, it's not just that it's younger, it's that its existence is dependent on the digital in terms of like video games are quite different from its physical like counterpart, which would be board games, right? Or tabletop games.
Mm.
Because it changes it completely because of what you can do with video games. Whereas music existed before you could record it, and it existed mostly in the same form. Like, of course, now we've got like digital ways of making music, but the essence of it hasn't changed dramatically. Music's I mean, now it's slightly different with like the rise of AI, but
Yeah, just let the AI do it.
yeah, but the fundamentals of like music are the same, and the same. That's why I like put films under production, because if we then go back to theatre, like, I mean, apart from films that use a lot of, oh my god, what's the word for it?
Digital
Well,
effects.
yeah, thank you. Creates like a vastly different experience from those that don't, but we still watch a lot of movies that don't use any digital effects. So the essence of those still stay the same, but video games are kind of their own thing, and they exist in a world where their lifetime has been fast forwarded, like in terms of like how it's distributed compared to like the distribution of music. Like that took a long time, whereas the distribution of video games from physical to digital, like being digital only,
Very
is
quick.
like very quick. So maybe that's impacted it. And I don't know about you both, but I remember a time where, not saying that I did this, but you could go to you could go to like a boot sale or the market or something, and
Old
there was these
CDs.
things called chipped
Oh,
PlayStations.
okay.
I didn't
I've heard something
personally.
about that.
Yeah,
I read it on Wikipedia.
I'm not saying that I personally done this, but it
You
was
had
like
some
a.
good friends.
Yeah, I was at a lot of boot sales, so I
Yeah,
saw
I
the
had good friends.
exchange. Yeah, and like there was a time where some people would like transfer a game from one disc to another, and it was not a legitimate distribution. But then we quickly shifted into like digital store downloads and licensing being tied like in a different way. So then that made that.
Yeah,
But you do still have some DRM, is it DRM free
DRM. Yeah.
purchases, which means you could then, at least for yourself, like it's always been legal to burn something onto disk for yourself for your own preservation. But yeah, then we add like streaming services and like games more of a service, and then
Service, yeah. So I wanted
a
to touch
whole
on
other
that as well,
beast.
because that goes to the ownership question. And like you said, Tazzy, the shift from physical, like I own this piece of material, to its streaming, or is some kind of subscription service, has been relatively quick for games. And it was, we talked about 80s and 90s, like consoles came with the cartridges and CDs. But then it was early 2000s where we had Xbox Live Arcade and 2004 and PlayStation Network 2006, and then in the 2010s the digital stores, and also where we are in the 2020s with digital sales on console now surpassing physical sales. And then you're getting like the digital edition of consoles where there is no disc. And maybe some of that is because games being new has the advantage of looking over at, like, oh, music. Steve Jobs has managed to convince the whole record industry to to buy into iTunes, and that being the first step of like subscription services and the things that came then on. That seems to work, or they thought it worked. There was this time where it was streaming was everything, and then people just jumped on that. And then you do get into the space where we are now, is as well as having all these like remakes and remasters, the digital marketplace and the game subscription services. So we now have Game Pass, which Tazzie's now jumped back on, that are completely changing the way we access, and I would say like even like think of playing games. So in a way, they do offer great value. And for a long time, Xbox Game Pass was the quote unquote best deal in gaming. But then they really do raise questions about game ownership and long term preservation. And Quang's touched on that in terms of like games can go. And I think, Quang, you mentioned the very recent story as we record, about the Xbox 360 store shutting down and you've lost access to those games. So yeah, we can like touch on that, and just to set the lay of the land and see who's doing what. I mean, when it comes to game subscription services, we've got things on PC like EA Play, Xbox Game Pass for PC, that offer massive libraries and you pay monthly. You've got Obviously, Game Pass is also on the Xbox, and it's very much a subscription model that leans towards the first party titles at launch, or at least it did until recent changes. But for the most part, yeah, first party things on launch. But then, yeah, we've seen the Xbox 360 store shut down. PlayStation has evolved in some way. I'm not sure what they're doing with that, but they've got a pay monthly service that has a mix of older and newer games. Nintendo does what Nintendo does, so we've got the Switch Online does offer classic titles, but the selection is limited and rotated. I feel they're going for like that Disney Vault model, like get it while you can, kind of thing. But again, sort of monthly fee. And the interesting one is Netflix, because they are now starting to explore the video game space. And I've now seen, I think it was just last week or a couple of weeks ago, they are now popping games up on that home page. So it's an approach that's still in the early stages, but it does reflect Netflix's like strategy to diversify, because it all comes down to attention, right? And then
Yeah.
that's what. So you've got that. So yeah, what do you both feel about subscription services, and specifically that idea of their impact on ownership? Is it good? I mean, it's convenient, but is it good?
So I want to mention at the start of this year, Philippe Tremblay, the director of subscriptions at Ubisoft, and I'm gonna paraphrase here. He said something to the effect of gamers need to get comfortable about not
Yes.
owning their games,
Yeah, I saw this. Yeah.
and that sent shockwaves through the industry and gamers. And if you mentioned Netflix, like how many times has Netflix had a show and you've watched it and you've enjoyed it, and then you go back to watch it another time and it's no longer there?
Yep.
And so it means you're the content that you wish to enjoy is now beholden to the provider. You don't have access to it anymore. So yes, it becoming a streaming service means they have control over the content itself. If they decided to pull it from their store, it means that you no longer have access to it. It means you no longer own it. But then we talked about getting backups from your games from the market. I mean, if you no longer own these games, then if you find a backup somewhere, does that mean you're not pirating it? It's
Yeah. Well, I
what
mean,
does that
according to the
mean? Not
industry, you
owning
still
it.
are. Yes. Yeah, I think we know that. But yeah, we're not owning it. And the because I saw that story as well in terms of like get used to it. But and play devil's advocate here. Haven't we got used to it? Is he wrong?
No, how upset was I when they pulled Outrun 2600 from 2006 from the store? Game that I love to pieces, and I can no longer play because it's no longer in the store.
Yeah.
And I have to go out and find the disc so I can own the game. I feel like if I'm, especially Nintendo don't work for it. Nintendo charge pretty much the same price
Just
digitally
Yeah.
for the game physically, and then they're gonna tell me that, oh, if we pull it from our servers, you no longer own it. I've just paid the same amount of money for your
Mm,
digital download. What was the point in that?
I've felt like that about digital games. That's one of the reasons why I've never really jumped on the buying digital games thing. Because why are they the same price? At least like Nintendo are very bad for that in terms of there never seems to be a sale that's actually a sale.
it's like gold, doesn't lose value.
Yeah, but I feel like, I mean, I've not really looked that much on digital PlayStation stores because the 100%, I don't play that many PlayStation games nowadays. I don't have a PS5. I buy secondhand PlayStation games because I predominantly game on my Xbox and my Switch. And yeah, like I have to set up alerts for like Xbox games to go on sale. And one of the things I've always said is, why is the game so expensive digitally? And I feel like it should be like a half the price. Or at least less expensive. Not having it, especially if we don't own our games, then I want a rental price. Then if I don't own this game,
I mean, that's essentially what you're doing. You're renting. It's a
yeah,
license to play this game until they decide otherwise.
yeah, which is why I personally, one of the reasons why I prefer subscription to digital buying games is because if I'm not going to own it anyway, I might as well like have a catalog that I can jump into. And yes, obviously that changes. Like they can pull the mediums whenever they want, but this is why you should buy games that you really, really like. So I really need to buy Dragon Quest Builders because I love that game. So I need a physical copy of it. And yeah, and then like games like for me, like Call of Duty, I've tried to. I actually, to be fair, I go back and play some of the older ones once in a while, but that's more of like a nostalgia thing. And then I'm like, oh god, like shooters are way better nowadays. They have actually massively
Oh
benefited
yeah.
from being updated. So like a game like that, like cool. I added up how much a year's worth of Ultimate would cost and how much a brand new Call of Duty game costs, and it's definitely worth just subscribing because I get other games with it.
Yeah. I mean, you get all the games with it, and it's the value of like
Yeah,
those hours spent, right?
yeah. So it's like you have to balance it up. You have to recognize that if you're digitally buying or subscribing, that you are not owning those games. But I think that developers, especially like the big ones, have a responsibility to then make sure that games are available to buy physically.
But then when consoles are coming without disk drives,
Don't even
it
get me
feels like
started on that.
it
But at
feels
least
like
there's
it's
an
kind of giving
option
up.
to you can get a one with a disc or you
Yes,
can't. It's if they ever stop making it available
like the
like
option
without
available.
the option available. Also, the thing that bugs me is that you have to get like a whole new console, like a whole separate console. It'd be great if like the Series S, you could just plug a like a disk drive onto it. Like, why not? It has a
Right?
USB slot and you can plug a
Can you not
keyboard
do that?
into it. Not as far as I'm aware.
No, you
You
can't.
sh-
No.
Oh, okay.
you should be, but like they could. I'm sure. Well, I don't know. I literally have no idea because I don't I don't do this. But like from my minimal knowledge, I'm sure it's just like a few lines of code that would be the difference between being able to plug the disk drive in.
From a technical standpoint, adding a disk drive to an Xbox Series S would require you to the data bus isn't fast enough to stream games off the
Okay.
disk. You'd literally have to take the disk, put the disk in, and then copy it to the hard drive to play it. Whereas you look at something like the new PS5 Slim, and that has a removable drive bay because it has
Yeah,
a direct
that's what I
connection
was
to the
thinking of.
motherboard.
So you can do it
Uh-huh.
with the PS5 Slim, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right,
So
that's what I was.
then in a position where you can do that. But the way things are going, I see the next generation, if not the next generation, but the one after the next generation, consoles are going to be digital only. It's where we're going. It's where we're
That's
heading.
what I feel.
It
Yeah.
means it means the owners, the rights owners, have more control over things. They don't have copies of the games going around. There's a whole thing about the secondhand market. I think it was Xbox when they were saying, "Oh, here's how I share my game," versus how PlayStation share their game. I think you had to rebuy it or something like that, and you had to get the rights transferred across. Whereas in PlayStation, you could just literally just hand this to someone else. Because again, it comes down to money. Ultimately, if they can make money on every single game they sell, and then make money on a game by it being resold,
Yeah.
that's what they want to do. But obviously, that's not really feasible. So by making it only digital, everyone has to buy their copy. There's a thing about your Steam library. If you were to pass away, your Steam library belongs to you. You can't pass it on to someone else.
Hmm,
It's gone unless you give them your login. Your
right.
Steam library is gone once you pass away. There's no donating. I'm sorry, I'm not donating. That's what I'm looking for.
Inherent.
Inheriting it. Yeah, you can't pass it on. So
Huh.
the thing's
That's
being
so
digital,
sad.
ownership's gone. Yeah.
That is. It
That's so.
feels
I'm
like.
just gonna name all my kids like after me, so then they
Yeah.
can't own it. Not
It's
just
still.
live
I'm back after 90
names
years
in my
just to play
name.
this game. it
Oh,
it does feel like, because I'm thinking like now, sort of, well, where do we go from here, and what do we want to see change? Because Quang, you mentioned earlier like the petition to stop game publishers from like just pulling that support. So that is so there's a UK thing. So it's a public campaign called Stop Killing Games. So they've organized a petition on the government's website, which passed 10,000 signatories needed to secure a response. So the statement added below, which I've got from the news report, was attributed to the Department of Culture, Media and Sport here in the UK. The department says consumers should be aware that there is no requirement in UK law compelling software companies and providers to support older versions of their operating systems, software, or connected products. There may be occasions where companies make commercial decisions based on the high running costs of maintaining older services, older servers for video games that have declining user bases. So this is a campaign that came up in particular because, speaking of Ubisoft, announced it was shutting down online support for the 2014 racing game The Crew due to constraints related to server infrastructure and licensing. The game's online connectivity means that it is now unplayable even in single player mode. So as we look forward, it makes me think it brings to mind a question of, should publishers be legally required to maintain archives of their games? Is that where we need to? Because as we're talking, it does feel at the moment like it does come down to the publishers and the people who, maybe not even necessarily the people who are making the games, but certainly the people who are distributing, marketing the games and all that. Yeah, should there be a legal requirement to preserve these games? Are we going to have to force someone to think of games as art, as cultural items that need to be preserved?
Yeah, the problem is modern games are permanently online now. They require servers to run, and servers cost money to run. The number of games that are being pulled because they decided we can no longer afford for this legacy game for us to run the servers, it's untold. Because the more games head that way, the more the costs ramp up. I run a small indie company. We could never afford to make an online game and then keep it legacy running for more than a
Forever.
number of years. Because if it doesn't bring money in anymore, where is the incentive for them to carry on paying for making it run? But this comes down to the games we're playing now. If they can obviously find a way where they can, I don't know, open source the server so people can run their own servers, that would be wonderful. But a lot of it's proprietary tech, so they don't want to give it away. They don't want to give their secrets away and their tech away. So I don't know whether I don't know what the answer is for this, because as much as I would love all games to run forever, there is a inherent cost involved in games that are online.
Yeah, I think as well, like, I feel like single player experiences, contained experiences, is the one that frustrates me the most,
Yeah.
when you can no longer experience them because something shuts down. It's like, why can I not just have it? I think that's the bit that frustrates me the most. And then there's like the online experiences, right? A lot of the sort of like more live service games, like, obviously it's annoying that you can't just play that forever.
Mm.
Maybe they can do something where it's like,
Knockout City.
you vote, I know, Knockout City, that you like vote for a game to like come back for a year or something. Or like, where possible, like making it available for like peer-to-peer hosting. Because I feel like there are some games that are just like massively multiplayer online type ones. Like, that's just not realistic. But something like Knockout City, like, why can I just be able to play the game and like host it like old school style? Because even like Minecraft, I remember when you could just play that on I don't know if you still can. It's definitely harder if you can, but you can just play that on a server and you can like host your own server. So like, yeah, I feel it would be nice to just like make this like, hey, this is something you can do. It's now open source. It's now peer to peer. Like, we're done with it, but if you want to keep going, that's on you, kind of thing.
Right. Yeah.
So I feel like it's not much different from what Quang said. I'm really not
You
having a big
know,
discussion, am I?
No, but it's
Yes, to what Quang said.
yeah, cosign. So yeah, I feel it feels like there's a conversation to be had at different levels as we go forward because we're saying that games should be preserved. So it's art, it's culture, it should be preserved. But then I sort of come back to the thing I said initially about does the hardware, does it provide or does it prove a particular block to some of this? And it kind of sounds like it does because especially when we're talking about ongoing maintenance, like the Titanic's been made, you're just copying bits and shifting bits around, but preserving, live service game or game with any kind of online aspect to it, that has just an ongoing cost to it, and it changes the dynamic. And then again, the sort of licensing. So I mentioned earlier about the Video Game History Foundation, the report that noted that libraries and archives can digitally preserve but not digitally share video games and can provide on-premises access only, whereas libraries and archives are allowed to digitally share other media types such as books, films, audio, and are not restricted to on-premise access because they enjoy exemptions under the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. So I feel there's different conversations about how do we think about games as art, as cultural items, the licensing, the hardware, and then like that commercial aspect. It feels interesting. Yeah, it feels like because I wasn't sure where this would go when we started, but it feels like there's something there, but then it's actually more complex, more complicated, and requires people to not just see games as commercial products as a first stage, and then be more just change some of these laws. I say that like it's easy to do, but it feels like a real conversation is needed if we are going to keep the games and not lose a bunch of games when they don't have to be. I know, like you said, Quang, a lot of other mediums have lost items, but I feel like video games is maybe at risk at losing a lot that doesn't need to be lost if you just change the way you look at games and some of the laws. But yeah, as we round up, how do you both feel about how best to move forward?
It's a complex question. As you
Yeah,
said, it's there's cost involved. There's and like so it'll be wonderful to have all the media there with you forever, but then someone has to do that. Someone has to put the effort in. There has to be people in place to do this, and those people need to be paid. The servers
yeah,
need to be looked after. Who's is there a fund for that? To preserve it. Whereas you can have art stored in museums, in vaults, and things like that. I know Embracer have a huge collection of old consoles and game games, so they're trying to collect one of everything for preservation. But Embracer are obviously a private-owned company,
mm,
so whether that means we get access to that one day, who knows? Like it's not a publicly accessible thing, but I know it's a preservation thing that they're doing. But someone has to fund it, and Embracer obviously have the money to do that. Is there a honest on the governments to preserve their country's heritage and their country's art? As you said, it's important to look at video games as art. It's just another medium that we use. It's a form of art. So
mm.
maybe the government do need to put money into that. That's something they need to look at. I don't know. I don't know who pays for it. That's the problem.
Yeah, that's always the question.
And we can't like preserve every single game ever. That's just
Yeah,
not
yes.
doable. There's too many of them. But it feels like it does feel like there needs to be some stuff changed. I think the thing that bugs me is that even if I physically own a game nowadays, like you put it in and then it's not even like the disc itself isn't even a complete game. So I feel like I should be able to just have that, because then at least I can take it into my own like hands and be like, I've bought this game, I should have a game that I can
Right.
keep for as long as I deem that I want to. But I feel like I just want to like stop recording and run down to CEX, even though it's closed now.
And just buy everything.
Just like
Just
buy a load of
I'll take over this. You're
yeah,
not doing it right.
I take one of
I
everything.
trust you. Yeah.
But no, I think maybe there's some onus on us as consumers to see something we like and be like, okay, I want to vote with my money and make sure that this thing is not lost to the sands of time.
Yes.
So yes, I
So,
had to drop a video game pun in there somewhere.
see what you did there. Okay. On that note, I feel that's a good place as any. But yeah, no, just it is definitely a lot of pieces to that. But like you say, Taz, if you like something, buy it because then you own it, or at least as best as you can. Certainly more than digital purchases, the certainly the streaming or the subscription services. You're not owning, you're renting at best. So yeah, and then I feel this is something that's going to be talked more and more about. So we might have to come back to it at some point. But there you go, a little introduction into different considerations around video game ownership and preservation. Let us know what you think if you if you remember the days of CDs and cartridges. Let us know. Give us your feedback on what could be done going forward as well. As always, studio77 at mymatter.com is one of the ways that you can reach us. Before we wrap up for this episode, let's check in with our guests and any projects that they are working on.
So, Quang, we'd love to hear any latest projects or news that you want to shout out to us, and then also let our audience know where to find you online.
So one of the things about looking at video games is that you come across NDAs constantly. So the current game I'm working on is for a company, the wonderful Bitmap Bureau, who also make games for old systems, also for new systems too. I'm working with them at the moment, and everything we're doing is under NDA, so I can't talk about that. But you can find me in all video game stuff. Asobi.tech is the company if you want to know about the video game stuff I'm making. And Quang DX is me, who posts about stuff in my life, mostly food, to be honest. But come find me on social media that way.
Thank you so much. We'll add some links to the show notes to make that easier for everyone to just click on through.
Yeah, and yeah, thank you for joining us. Quite good to catch up with you as well. That's always a good thing about the podcast. You just bring people on and it's like, oh yeah, we haven't spoken in a while. Yeah, so thank you for giving us that perspective.
Total pleasure. Thank you again so much for having me on. Always a pleasure. Great topics, great thought-provoking things that we to go over for sure.
We try. We try. So if you also enjoyed listening to this episode of Story X Story, definitely make sure you subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss a future episode. You can also give us a 5-star rating and review, which helps us reach new listeners and fans of story discussions. Direct link sharing is good too. Just send a friend a link as well. So we're story creators ourselves, and you can discover our manga universe online. All the titles are available there, in addition to the new one that we're working on, Origins Against All Odds. So stay tuned for that. You can also join the Studio 77 Discord server and also support what we do at My Matter with a membership. So you can consider that as well. And then also consider taking part in our Do I Look Like a Gamer video game representation campaign, which Quang was one of the original, the first year when we started in 2022, one of the 40 in that year. So this is our yearly initiative for diversity and inclusion in the video games industry and wider culture. So I mentioned some of the plans that we've already done at the top and some that are to come. Make sure you save looklikeagamer.com. Keep checking that because we'll update that as well as our socials with the next stages of this year's campaign. And as for the podcast, we're now back with new episodes each week. So we've got new episodes on Thursdays. Those include creator interviews, video game discussions like this one, and deep dives into stories across pop culture. You can always give us a shout directly. Our email address is studio77 at mymatter.com, and our website with links to subscribe is mymatter.com/storyxstory. So thank you for tuning in, and until next time, stay safe. And remember, whenever the markets crumble around you, make sure to invest in the secure options, bonds, gold, and of course, Nintendo games, which never, ever, ever lose their value, apparently. Take care, everyone.